Please stand for the Chairman of Thanet District Council.
Right. Good evening, members and officers of the Council and members of the press and public. Welcome to this meeting of the Council. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security doors to my right or opposite the lift in the foyer. Please do not use the lift. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. That would be interesting tonight, wouldn't it? Officers will assist you and advise you if it was deemed safe to return. I would advise that if filming takes place, anybody in attendance of the public area may have their image captured. I urge filming procedure to avoid members of the public, particularly if they have children present. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No. Right. Any filming or recording will not be permitted for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered, following the exclusion of press and public from the meetings. Would everyone present please ensure that the mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst this meeting is in progress. Apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Councillors Preston, Driver and Huxley. Is there any other apologies for absence?
Yeah, Chair. Councillor Garner and then Councillor.
Right, Councillor Garner.
Councillor Wing.
John Nichols and Barry Manners.
Thank you.
And Councillor Banbridge, apologies.
Banbridge, yeah. Right, agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 7th of December 2023 be approved and signed as a correct record. Can I have a seconder from the floor? Do members agree? Thank you. Announcements. That's agenda item 3, announcements. It has come to my attention from the section 151 officer that there is an error in section 11 of the budget report regarding section 25. A new section 11 has been republished and a paper copy is available on members' desks. I will now call for a 10-minute recess that will allow members to read the updated report. 30 seconds. Right then, agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chair, I have an interest to declare, as I've just sort of realised, is that the business that I run is a tenant of Kent Innovation Centre, which we'll be setting the fee for. Although I would ask again, it seems a little bit over the top that I would have to withdraw completely from the budget for that reason.
Unfortunately, Councillor Scobie, the way the report is drafted, it's a composite report, it's not a distinct item, and so there's no alternative but for you to withdraw from the discussion and not vote on the whole matter. I agree that's unfortunate.
Agenda item 5, draft corporation plan 2024/28. Would members please refer to the supplementary agenda 1 and 2? I call upon the leader.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping I wouldn't have to say too much this evening. I thought it was Councillor Yates' show, but there you go. There's an item for me to introduce nonetheless. Draft corporate plan. So the report in front of councillors today proposes a new corporate plan which sets the direction of travel for the council over the next 4 years. I'd like to thank Hannah Thorpe and her team for their work in the preparation of this. A clearly defined plan is essential to support the council to work towards achieving our longer term aspirations for Thanet. It also ensures that resources across the council are focused on what matters most to local people. That's why the corporate plan is being considered ahead of the budget proposals this evening. The plan really is the source code that underpins all our policy and decision making. Having a clear and concise corporate plan will help us to ensure the community and our stakeholders are aware of the work the council is delivering, and through regular reporting of our performance will provide an oversight of the progress being made. This draft plan was subject to a 7-week public consultation, and my thanks to everyone who took the time to respond. There is encouragingly broad support for the proposed new priorities for the council, which are to keep our district safe and clean, to deliver the housing we need, to protect our environment, to create a thriving place, and to work efficiently for you, in no particular order, I should say. These are clear statements which reflect the ongoing feedback we receive from our constituents when they tell us that they want their streets to be kept clean, to be able to feel safe, and to have thriving towns in the district. The plan has previously been before Public Cabinet and the Overview and Scrutiny Panel. The panel made no recommendations for changes, which I hope means that it has the broad support, the plan has the broad support of the council. We will inevitably disagree over aspects of delivery, but I believe the priorities are the right ones for the council. In the end though, a plan is only words. It's up to all of us to deliver on it. That is what residents will judge us on, and that's what the budget tonight focuses on as well. So subject to the decision this evening, the new corporate plan will be launched, supported by a communications plan, and officers will start the development of revised service plans to set out how the 4-year corporate plan will be delivered by the council in each service area. I move that the council approves the proposed corporate plan.
Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Whitehead. The item may be debated in the usual way. Do members agree?
Does anybody want to agree?
Thank you. Agenda item 6, HRA Budget 2024/25. I would advise that in accordance with the Council Procedure Rule 17.6, I will call for a recorded vote, on the motion or any amendments or subsequent motions. As a courtesy to the councillors, I will allow 10 minutes for the portfolio holder to introduce the budget and each political group spokesperson 5 minutes to respond to the budget. I call upon Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. The HRA budget is underpinned by a 7.7% increase in rents based on September's CPI inflation rate plus 1%. It is worth stressing that our proposed rents are substantially lower than the local housing allowance levels, and as such, the vast majority of this will be covered by increasing housing benefit or universal credit payments to our tenants. This rent increase is needed to continue to drive the HRA to a balanced and sustainable financial position, and also to finance our ambitious house building programme and house investment plan. Through consultation with the portfolio holder, there has been a change in the budget since the draft was presented to Cabinet in October, this being the creation of a hardship fund. This sees £30,000 being allocated to assist those tenants on a low income who may be struggling to meet the rent or associated service charges levied. The criteria of the fund will be developed and published by the Tenant and Leaseholder Service to ensure these specific tenants are supported. I move the recommendation as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Whitehead again. The item may be debated in an unusual way. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. With permission, I'd like to contribute simply to explain more about the HRA plans for the next year. Housing is often more about the unseen rather than the seen, those who are invisible rather than those who are visible. In recognition of that, housing strategy has to recognise the existence of both, those we already have responsibility for, whose needs are known, and those who are as yet unknown to us. As such, the housing revenue account has to not only function to repair and maintain our existing stock and support existing residents, but also has to reflect the significant increase in need for genuinely affordable housing in Thanet, to ensure that we can support those who are currently trapped in cycles of unaffordability, eviction and temporary housing. We have to not only look at what we currently deliver, but also what we need to deliver. Our new accelerated housing strategy looks not only at how we maintain our current portfolio and the standard of housing our tenants deserve, but also how we maximise council housing production to support new tenants. Our version of affordable rent is very different from the central government definition, which generally defines affordable rent as being up to 80% of private rental rates. For Thanet, that would be far from affordable, so we use a dual layer definition. Our affordable housing, which I tend to refer to as genuinely affordable housing, is classed at up to 80% of private rent, but not to exceed local housing allowance rate, which historically for this area never meets 80% of the private rental market. Put simply, our affordable housing will never go above local housing allowance. The vast majority of our stock is at social rent. Social rent is a lower rent than affordable rent and much lower than private market rent. At a social rent, a 3-bed house costs approximately £452.52 per month. At TDC affordable rent, it would cost approximately £704 a month. On the private market, 3-bed homes are currently renting at between £1,100 and £1,600 per month. The current local housing allowance rate for a 3-bed house is £797.81, meaning that both forms of rental that we offer would be more than covered by housing benefit or universal credit, making both accessible for even our most vulnerable or disadvantaged tenants. It is worth noting that the vast majority of individuals who rely on LHA to afford their housing are currently trapped within the private rental market. This is one of the principal reasons for creating and adopting our accelerated delivery programme, as the most disadvantaged residents in terms of housing affordability and therefore cost of living are currently within the private sector. To help them, as we have helped those within the council portfolio, we have to expand our provision. Last year, council increased rents across both tenures at 7%. 2-year inflation stands at 16.8%, and we are potentially increasing rent by 14%, 7% across 2 years, So we are currently 2.1% below inflation over 2 years. Although these decisions are made yearly, it is important to remember that they have a cumulative effect. Choosing not to increase rent this year would not only reduce housing funding for this year, but would reduce it in perpetuity, as we cannot choose to raise the rent to make up for it next year. As discussed earlier on, it is also important to remember that this increase, apart from households that receive no assistance with housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit, does not come from residents' pockets. It will be paid by central government, as the increase is still well below the full rate of local housing allowance. Increasing at 7.7% across both forms of tenure, but providing a support fund to ensure that any households on a low income whose increase is not paid by benefits is not impacted, allows us to support more residents in the private sector, grow the portfolio further, and does not disadvantage current tenants. It is essential to consider the fact that our most vulnerable residents currently are those who are homeless, struggling to afford private rent, and in insecure tenancies. In only 4 months, we have been able to add 123 extra properties to our portfolio to support these residents through our new strategy. But to continue supporting others in vulnerable positions, it is vital that we both maintain and grow our portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Bayford.
Thank you. I know. Sorry. Yes, I know that social rents are already very, very much lower than the in public sector, and I would just ask, how will we decide who will benefit from this £30,000 hardship fund? How will it be assessed? Thank you.
Chair, can I answer?
Yes, I think so. Everybody would like to
I
know.
wasn't sure if I was allowed. As Councillor Yates said earlier, we will be developing our policy alongside the tenant and leaseholder group to determine how this fund is distributed. So, as part of the tenant and leaseholder group, you will also be part of creating that policy to ensure that we're looking after the people who most need it. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Right, nobody else then? Right, so I'll instruct the head of legal and monitoring officer to conduct a recorded vote.
Thank you, Chair. So in favour, abstain or against? Councillor Steve Alban.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Roshan Ara.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Tricia Austin. For. Thank you. Councillor Abby Lee Barlow. Okay. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Boyd.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bertie Braidwood.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Joanne Bright. Thank you. Councillor Christian Bright. Thank you. Councillor Leo Britcher. Councillor Helen Crittenden. Thank you. Councillor Alan Curry. Councillor Alicia de Abro. Thank you. Councillor John Davis.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Emma Dawson. Thank you. Councillor John Dennis.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor David Donaldson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Ruth Duckworth.
For.
Thank you. Councillor John Edwards.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Rick Everett.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Rupa Faruqi. Thank you. Councillor Phil Fellows.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Garner.
For.
Thank you. Councillor David Green.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Heather Keane.
For.
Thank you. Councillor George Cupp.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Pat Mackinson. Thank you. Councillor Jenny Mattyface. 4. Thank you. Councillor Pat Moore. 4. Thank you. Councillor Paul Moore.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Alan Munns.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Anne Mary Nixie.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Ovenden.
4.
Thank you. Councillor David Owen Hughes.
4.
Thank you. Sorry, Deborah Owen Hughes. Apologies. Sorry. Councillor Jack Packman.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Katie Pope. Councillor Rhys Pugh.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Rattigan. Thank you. Councillor Brenda Rogers. Thank you. Councillor George Rusecki.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Harry Scobie.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Will Scobie.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Matthew Scott.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Abby Smith.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Cedric Towning.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Whitehead.
4.
Thank you. Councillor John Worrow.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Wright. Thank you. Councillor Rob Yates.
4.
Thank you. Just add those up. Yeah, 32, isn't it?
32, 16.
And 16.
16.
Do you want to read out the final?
So, no, I'll
Check.
so 32.
Right, for the motion 32, abstention 16.
That's agreed.
I believe it's 16.
That's, yeah, that's agreed.
That's agreed.
So can I just be clear about this? No, that's fine, just in relation to the...
Right, agenda item 7,
Yes.
budget
Yes, which is not
2024/25, fees and charges. Would members please refer to the supplementary agenda item agenda 3? I would advise that in accordance with the council's procedure, rule 17.6, I will call for a recorded vote on the motion or any amendments and substantial motions. As a courtesy to the councillors, I will allow 10 minutes for the portfolio holder to introduce the budget, and each particular group, political group, spokesperson 5 minutes to respond to the budget. I call...
Can we just,
Chair.
Before, yeah. Just,
Can I just make a point of clarification? Just apologies to Councillor Scobie. Upon seeking further clarification, I can confirm that you haven't, in fact, got an interest. You've got an interest in the lease and not in the charging element of the report, so it's okay for you to participate and to take part in the vote. Thank you. Apologies.
I called upon Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. Labour would like to thank the Council's finance team and Council officers for their hard work on this year's budget. Once again, we are all sat discussing a budget that is significantly less in real terms than the Council's budget in 2010. And it does continue to make me angry that local councils are expected to function in a high inflation environment in the midst of a cost of living crisis with so few financial resources. Saying that, we are more fortunate than other councils in that we are not looking to make budget cuts this year, and indeed we are looking to increase the provision of core services that our residents are asking for us to focus on here in Thanet. That will be the theme of this council's budget speech, delivering a compassionate, progressive budget focused on the services that residents are calling out for. The resident survey is fed heavily into our corporate priorities for the next 4 years, so I'll outline this budget based upon those priorities. On cleaner and safer streets, we have £188,000 for 6 new street cleansing operative posts. £122,000 for 3 full-time equivalent staff positions within open spaces over a 2-year period with an associated vehicle. £80,000 in a team to deal with graffiti removal. £30,000 to increase our playground maintenance budget. £350,000 of capital spend on improving our CCTV provision and district coverage. This will facilitate cleaner streets, less graffiti, more recycling, improved maintenance of our playgrounds and upgraded CCTV provision to keep our residents safe. In addition to the above, we are working with KCC through use of on-street parking revenue to support them in making highway improvements in our district. Our second priority is delivering the housing we need. We are allocating £1.2 million in the 24-25 capital programme for homelessness accommodation, and then we're committing to allocate £2.4 million each year for this purpose, with expected spend totalling £7.2 million over the next 4 years. This is in addition to the 400 council homes we are committed through the HRA. In the long term, it is cheaper for the council to provide our own housing, ensuring high quality, warm homes and homelessness accommodation rather than relying on the private sector. By using this strategy, this council will have an asset once those properties have been paid off. By taking control of these buildings, we will be continuously generating income to support existing and future housing, all whilst being able to set rental prices significantly lower than the private market rate. Our third priority is protecting the environment. By increasing our cleansing operatives post by 6, this budget will in parallel allow us to work on an ambitious programme to increase Thanet's recycling rate. We're investing £100,000 for the use of hot foam for removing weeds as opposed to glyphosate weed killer. This approach is being undertaken at Sevenoaks Council, and we are proud to be removing its use from TDC operations. By continuing previous investment in this council's home energy team using the Better Care Fund, we are supporting residents, both renters and landlords, to improve insulation measures, deal with energy poverty, and giving residents the option to purchase discounted solar panels through the Solar Together scheme. This budget includes £39,000 for a new public health agenda officer. Part of their remit will be to continue to develop our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan to make our streets safer for residents. On the council's own emissions, our capital budget includes £783,000 for solar panel installation on Hartsdown and Ramsgate leisure centres, with news on these projects due to be announced soon. £6.5 million has been allocated into new capital projects for the decarbonisation of this council building, Gateway Library next door and the Kent Innovation Centre. Allocation for electric waste collection vehicles and new vehicles at Ramsgate Port are also included, continuing the investments already made into our electric vehicles fleet. So increasing recycling, stopping glyphosate, reducing emissions from vehicles and buildings, improved insulation, new solar panels and electric vehicles. This is exactly what the public wants, and we have a plan to develop this further in order to reach this council's net zero target by 2030. The fourth priority is a thriving place. We have £50,000 in this budget for a one-off sports development role, as we've spoken to the Kent FA and believe we can draw down on additional funding to support a healthier Thanet. We have placed £11,000 into the further engagement with the residents using the new online engagement platform, Your Voice Thanet. This is in order to ensure that residents are engaged with and listened to, especially during the Levelling Up and Town Deal programmes. To facilitate the regeneration projects, we have placed £80,000 to fund 2 new procurement specialists to ensure the regeneration programme can move forward efficiently. So these changes will help us to improve sport provision in Thanet, develop resident dialogue, and additional procurement will facilitate the reopening of the Ramsgate Clockhouse, the reopening of Margate Winter Gardens and Theatre Royal, upgrading infrastructure at Ramsgate Port, and this is combined with the £1.25 million we have previously committed to support refurbishing and reopening the public toilets in Broadstairs and across our district, which we all know are a keen focus for residents and councillors alike. The fifth and last priority on the corporate plan is working efficiently with residents. We have revisited the proposed new fees and charges being charged to our residents and lowered the proposed increase to charges for parking, bin replacements and green waste, originally proposed, moving them from 8% to 5%. This is in line with a falling inflation rate. We very much recognise the cost of living issue that residents are struggling with at the moment, and we want to minimise the costs residents face for our services. Residents will be glad to hear that we are accomplishing all these budget adjustments whilst, based off the accounts of 22-23, having the highest level of reserves in 10 years and having doubled the level of reserves this council has since 2016. So, as mentioned at the start, councillors, we present today a compassionate, progressive budget that focuses on services the residents are calling for. A final point to note is that a last-minute government announcement has been made, which provided a move from the original 3% funding guarantee to 4% for 24-25. This is anticipated to generate a one-off contribution to the budget in the region of £160,000. We are proposing that these funds will be set aside in an earmarked reserve to facilitate one-off investment, and that any drawdown from this fund is agreed by Cabinet. We believe this new reserve is especially important given the recent cyber attack incident, which officers are still working through, and we would believe it would be improper to allocate any of these one-off funds without further analysis being done on the costs of this cyber incident by officers. Therefore, councillors, officers and members of the public, we believe this budget is delivering on the needs of our residents in a progressive and compassionate manner. I move the recommendations with the amendment that any additional funds generated through the change in funding guarantee are set aside in an earmarked reserve with any spend to be agreed by Cabinet. I move the recommendations as set out in the report. Thank you.
Can I have a seconder, please? The item will be debated in the usual way. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cab. What's that? Thank you very much, Councillor Yates. First, I'd like to thank the hard-working officers for the hard work. It's always hard to balance a budget, especially in the current climate with global rising costs. It's promising to see that because of the high levels of deprivation, Provisional core grant funding for 2024-25 is broadly £409,000 higher, or I keep going. Where are we? I'll go back. It's promising that because of the high levels of deprivation, provisional core funding for 2024-25 is broadly £409,000 higher, or 5.49 more than allocated for 2023-24. On positive notes of the budget, it's great to see there's more resources in the budget going to open spaces, and especially graffiti cleaning, which is prolific across the Isle. The £25,000 allocated for playground maintenance and for the £50,000 sport development will have a real positive impact on our residents. I have a couple of areas of concern in the budget I'd like to address. Firstly is the use of reserves. While I appreciate we now have built up health reserves, and reserves are there for a reason, it hasn't always been the case. I'm still concerned that the planned amounts of reserves we're planning on using for the next financial year and the long-term viability of plugging these shortfalls in coming financial years. Secondly is the parking charges. The Conservative group feel all parking charges should have been frozen until the parking review had been completed. Not putting blame on either administration, but the time this has taken is certainly not through the fault of our residents. With residents struggling financially in empty high streets, to now put more expenses to local residents may be a final nail in the coffin. As in the parking review, we should be looking at offsetting any increases to our local residents by increasing parking charges for our visitors, to the visitors. After exploring the possibility of these parking freezes with the Council of Financial Officers, it was explained because of how the budget is set, a long-term financial effect this may cause to the budget would offset any benefits and leave a hole, a plug, if these were frozen. So what I'm proposing as an amendment, which actually ironically mirrored Councillor Yates's amendment a year ago in the Chambers. And I know he must share my same concerns because his quote was, surely it's better to wait for the outcome of the review rather than increase costs so dramatically for our residents during a cost of living crisis before the review is even complete. I completely agree with that comment, Councillor Yates. So my proposed amendment is that residential parking permits increases are frozen for the next financial year, which allows time for the parking review to be completed. In a time where our residents are struggling in the financial climate, this small impact on the council's income will have impact on the financial for our residents. I think when you put the proposal, it was actually, if I recall, it was accepted.
Amendment days.
I oppose the amendment.
Yeah.
Have you a second for the amendment? Right, Councillor Ratton, can you clarify how you're going to fund that?
It's from the on-street parking reserves. I think it's called.
Yeah, we're just checking.
Good evening, councillors. I've conferred with my colleague, Mr. Sanham. I can confirm that that is a fundable proposal, so the budget would balance. You'd be looking at taking up to a maximum of £20,000 from the decommissioning reserve in order to fund that.
Right, councillors, do you want to debate? Councillor Everett.
I think it would have been helpful if that had been proposed at an earlier stage in the budget process, but I mean it is clear that the fees and charges process has not been as smooth as we would have liked because of the fact we decided to make changes around inflation. So I think in the circumstances and in the spirit of collaboration that the Labour front bench will support that amendment.
Anybody else want to speak now, after that revelation? Councillor Austin? No, that's right.
Okay, that's
Can we make further amendments now?
Not yet, no.
Right, so we're going to vote on that amendment. I'm going to ask the officer to do a recorded vote.
Starting with you again, Councillor Alban. Thank you. Councillor Rashan Ara. Thank you. Councillor Tricia Austin. Thank you. Councillor Abby Lee Barlow. Oh, yes, she's not here. Sorry. Councillor Jill Bayford. Thank you. Councillor Martin Boyd. Thank you. Councillor Bertie Braidwood.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Joanne Bright. Thank you. Councillor Christian Bright. Thank you. Councillor Leo Britcher.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Crittenden. Thank you. Councillor Alan Curry. 4. Thank you. Councillor Elsa Dabro. 4. Thank you. Councillor John Davis.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Emma Dawson. Thank you. Councillor John Dennis.
4.
Thank you. Councillor David Donaldson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ruth Duckworth.
4.
Thank you. Councillor John Edwards.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Rick Everett. Thank you. Councillor Rupa Faruqi. Thank you. Councillor Phil Fellows. Thank you. Councillor Mike Garner. Thank you. Councillor David Green. Thank you. Councillor Heather Keane. Thank you. Councillor George Cupp. Thank you. Councillor Pat Mackinson. Thank you. Councillor Jenny Matterface. Thank you. Councillor Pat Moore. Thank you. Councillor Paul Moore. Thank you. Councillor Alan Munns. Thank you. Councillor Anne-Mary Nixie. Thank you. Councillor Tony Ovenden. Thank you. Councillor Deborah Owen Hughes. Thank you. Councillor Jack Packman. Thank you. Councillor Katie Pope. Thank you. Councillor Rhys Pugh. Thank you. Councillor Mark Rattigan. Thank you. Councillor Brenda Rogers. Thank you. Councillor George Rusecki. Thank you. Councillor Harry Scobie. Thank you. Councillor Will Scobie. Thank you. Councillor Matthew Scott. Thank you. Councillor Abby Smith. Thank you. Councillor Cedric Towning. Thank you. Councillor Helen Whitehead. Thank you. Councillor John Worrow. Thank you. Councillor Linda Wright. Thank you. Councillor Rob Yates, finally. Thank you.
That's unanimous. Agreed.
That's agreed. Any other amendments?
Yes, Chair.
Go back to the order. So Councillor Austin, then Councillor Worrow, and then we'll go out of debate.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair. In this corner of the chamber, we are delighted with this budget. In general, we have had a few small amend suggestions, but we have discussed those quite openly and transparently with Cabinet and are happy to see this go forward. There's part of me that does regret the dear dead days of the fees and charges CAG when Councillor Yates and I came up with a variety of wizard wheezes, which were all completely ignored. The wizard wheezes that we came up with this time, some of them were actually anticipated. The glyphosate suggestion, for example, was something that we'd been pushing for some time and are very, very pleased to see in the budget. We do recognise that it will involve more staff time, and therefore we're also pleased to see the staffing that's associated with that. We are very, very pleased to see the improvements in facilities that make the most practical difference to residents, like public toilets, street cleansing, open spaces. We are very encouraged by the positive aspects of the budget, things like the health promotion, for example, and housing, areas that make a difference in the short and in the longer term. We had a few other suggestions that we are still in discussion about, but they don't make a material difference to the budget as it stands. And we'd very much like to thank officers for all their support for us, and most particularly their support for putting this budget together, and thank Cabinet for the transparent and positive way that they have met with our suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Councillor Worrow.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move an amendment. In the view of the continuing cost of living crisis and other financial pressures affecting household budgets, this amendment calls for council tax charges to be frozen at last year's levels. It is recognised that this caring move would not be without cost. So this amendment proposes that the increased monies would be drawn from the council's reserves.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Do you have a seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Good evening, councillors. In terms of funding core income from reserves, it's something the council does have the power to do, but as Section 151 officer, I would strongly recommend against it. The 1 year effect of doing so would be a approximate £350,000 reduction in our reserves, and place a structural strain on our budget. Because of the way council tax works, you'll never be able to get that income back because there are effectively caps in place. So that would be accumulated over the 4-year cycle of a medium-term financial plan to be approximately somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million pound pressure on our reserves, depending on the growth in the tax base.
Can I just interrupt? Section 151 officer, Chris, can you just confirm whether or not that amendment could?
Yes.
Thank you. So it's a valid amendment.
Right, shall we go debate? Councillor Everett.
Yeah, I think it's always attractive to all of us to propose not to increase council tax. Unfortunately, it's not the real world of local government finance. And I think that it's important that we are clear with our residents that the vast majority of their council tax does not come to this council, and we have no power to freeze the precepts. The vast majority of it goes to Kent County Council and other preceptors. The increase proposed tonight is 15 pence a week. 15 pence a week for a Band D property. So that is the saving that residents could look forward to if Councillor Worrow's amendment was to be passed. In terms of the principle of drawing down on reserves, because Councillor Rattigan also referred to it, I think the net drawdown in this budget is 0.755 million on reserves. It's important to note the principle on which we do that is either that taking that money out is going to be revenue earning in the future, and that's about half of that amount, and the rest of it is coming from reserves which actually exist to smooth out year-on-year bumps. So I think there's 312,000 coming out of the collection fund reserve, which is what we would expect to do from year to year because there are variations in the amount of council tax that's collected. And I think another 75,000 is to do with homelessness, and obviously there's a particular budgetary problem around that. So we're not making any significant drawdowns on reserves, and where we are proposing to use reserves, they're about investing in the council's future. I've got to say I was quite staggered that Michael Gove in his speech in Parliament on February the 5th encouraged councils to draw down from their reserves to spend on revenue. He said reserves are higher than they were pre-COVID and councils should be getting them down. I think that's a completely balmy idea. It certainly wouldn't be appropriate for this council, and I can't support the amendment. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak?
Can I respond, please, Chair? Can I respond?
Thank you, Chair. Just want to draw councillors' attention to clause 4.4 of the budget report, which shows that 72% of residents, when consulted on the resident survey, agreed with the growth areas of our budget proposal here today. And I raise this because these growth areas are actually jobs that we are creating, locally well-paid jobs. So if we were to start eating into reserves, then these growth areas would not be there, so we would not be able to create those jobs. Thank you.
You have a chance to sum up later on, Councillor Warrow. You speak now, you won't. Thank you.
I'll speak now because it's quite brief anyway. Sure? Okay, I'm quite happy to do that. Yeah, the leader was talking about Michael Gove, but some of us might remember the recent local council elections when one Sir Keir Starmer, he is a knight, isn't he, the leader of the working class party, is Sir Keir Starmer? Yeah, Sir Keir Starmer actually said that he recommends, he recommended at the time, if you don't believe it, Google it, that councils should freeze council tax. It's funny now, the general election's coming up and you've got a Labour council here and they don't want to listen to Keir Starmer's recommendations. The total reserves requirement to support this decision for the first 4 years is 1.5116 million. It's well affordable. People are struggling out there. I mean, come on. You know, you're supposed to be a caring party over there. Prove it.
Anybody else want to?
Anybody else want to speak?
Would anybody else like to speak? Have we?
Okay, that's fine.
Right.
We need to vote.
So I shall instruct the head of legal and monitoring officer to conduct a recorded vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Alban.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Roshana Ara.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Tricia Austin.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Boyd.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Bertie Braidwood.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Joanne Bright. Thank you. Councillor Christian Bright.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Leo Britcher.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Crittenden.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Alan Curry. Thank you. Councillor Elsa de Abro. Thank you. Councillor John Davis.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Emma Dawson. Thank you. Councillor John Dennis. Thank you. Councillor David Donaldson. Thank you. Councillor Ruth Duckworth.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor John Edwards.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Rick Everett. Thank you. Councillor Rupa Faruqi. Thank you. Councillor Phil Fellows.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Garner.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor David Green. Thank you. Councillor Heather Keane. Thank you. Councillor George Cupp.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Pat Mackinson. Sorry, could you say that again? Against, thank you. Councillor Jenny Matterface. Thank you. Councillor Pat Moore. Thank you. Councillor Paul Moore.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Alan Munns. Thank you. Councillor Anne-Marie Nixie, sorry. Thank you. Councillor Tony Ovenden. Thank you. Councillor Deborah Owen Hughes. Thank you. Councillor Jack Packman. Thank you. Councillor Katie Pope. Thank you. Councillor Rhys Pugh. Thank you. Councillor Mark Rattigan. Thank you. Councillor Brenda Rogers. Thank you. Councillor George Grusecki. Thank you. Councillor Harry Scobie. Thank you. Councillor Will Scobie. Thank you. Councillor Matthew Scott. Thank you. Councillor Abby Smith. Thank you. Councillor Cedric Towning. Thank you. Councillor Helen Whitehead. Thank you. Councillor John Warrow. Thank you. Councillor Linda Wright. Thank you. And finally, Councillor Rob Yates. Thank you. Yeah.
3, 13, 36.
3:30.
Oh, 32, sorry, 32.
Is that right? Is that right? 26.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No. My bad. 4, 3. 13 abstentions. 32 again. So it falls.
So we got 4, 3. That's 3 votes for. Abstentions 13, against 32.
So that falls.
That falls. So we go back to the original motion.
So now, so now we go back to the original. We go back to the original motion. So does anybody want to debate the original motion?
Right, so we're now going to go back to the original motion. Anybody else want to debate the original motion? Councillor Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted, I think Councillor Rattigan has summed up our concerns, particularly to do with this budget, and I thank everyone within this chamber that supported Councillor Rattigan's amendment. And I appreciate that. Well, I'd like to think that going forwards there can be a little bit more collaboration in budgets. I appreciate that Labour have a majority, and of course this is your budget, but I do agree that I think it would be better for a lot of these discussions to be sorted out before we get into this chamber. The only concern that I have, particularly with this budget, and Councillor Rattigan has already referenced it, the fees and charges is separate, but particularly with the amount of money that we're taking out of reserves to the tune of £750,000, and I appreciate the leader has tried to provide some context to that, but particularly at a time when, and the supplementary agenda that was shared earlier, that we've all taken a break to read, does sum it up, that reserves have gone from, I think, and apologies, I'm going to have to check, but they've gone from 8.2 million on the period of 2015 to 2016 to now being at roughly about approximately £16 million, which of course, yes, we are in a much better position with our reserves, and I commend not just officers of this council, but all previous administrations since 2015 to get the reserves back up to where they are. I know that we in our budget last year ensured that we put £500,000 into reserves, and what I am concerned about is that if this is just a one-off, then that's completely understandable, but if this is the start of us taking more out of reserves than we're putting in, then soon we're going to find ourselves back into the position that we were in 2015, and that is incredibly concerning. But on this occasion, this is Labour's budget. A lot of it does make sense, and begrudgingly there are some increases for residents that are incredibly difficult, but on this occasion we will be supporting the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Pugh. Anybody else? Councillor Everett.
It's great having all these amendments because I can keep getting up speaking again. I just think, it's obviously for Councillor Yates to sum up, but I do thank Councillor Pugh for his support, and I think that it takes two to tango, I would say. I think that there was opportunities during the process, perhaps when Conservative group, if they had constructive thoughts, they could have shared them with us. But we're all learning about the new situation, and I think the fact that we've been able to accept the amendment that was proposed tonight shows that we are perfectly willing to be collaborative, even on the spur of the moment. And I thank him for the Conservative group's support. I think this is a really good budget in the circumstances, and I think that the council's finances are in decent shape, certainly compared with some other authorities not very far away from here, and indeed Kent County Council and Medway have got their own challenges. But what I'm particularly pleased about is that we are able to bring forward improvements to the public realm to put resource back into those street cleaning services, back into graffiti, back into the things that residents notice every day, because I think that is something which affects all of our residents, particularly in the urban areas. We are a tourist destination. We can't continue with the level of graffiti that we've got on our public street furniture. People in their neighbourhoods deserve street cleaning. They deserve to see those streets clean. Obviously, the council doesn't, on the whole, drop litter, but the council does have to clear it up, and it is a cost to residents. We would much rather that the litter wasn't dropped in the first place, but we do live in the real world. And I think over the years of austerity, understandably, those services have had to be cut back. This is a start to putting them back in place, and I'm not saying that we can transform the public realm this year or even over the 4 years of the council, but I certainly hope we can move the dial, and if we do that, then this council will have achieved something. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Everett. Councillor Braywood.
Just a question, Chair, on the budget. Just an observation from what Councillor Yates read out earlier. Why are Thanet Council contributing thousands of pounds towards solar installations on the Ramsgate swimming pool and the Margate swimming pool when these buildings are surely both your leisure and they'll benefit sort of financially from any sort of installations TDC are contributing towards?
Councillor Yates.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Braidwood. So the funding is actually, from my understanding, is the funding is external. So that's external funding that we have received, I believe, from the government, and we have, in effect, hired a. Well, I can tell you is that we have an officer in place whose job it is to decarbonise our estate. So for our carbon emissions, that includes this building and includes buildings we own, such as Hartsdown and Ramsgate leisure centres. I think your point is about, well, that currently your leisure is running them, but I believe they are our assets. So therefore the carbon emissions fall under us. And I'm quite hopeful that if solar panels are installed on them, that will reduce the costs of running those centres and hopefully making it cheaper for residents to be able to visit our leisure centres. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Bright.
I'm never going to miss the opportunity to speak, sorry. Yeah, I looked at my diary earlier, and it was a year ago that I think, more or less this week, that I first put my hat in the ring to become a councillor. And I've found this whole process really fascinating. And to Councillor Pugh's point, the collaboration that we've had with Councillor Fellows, Councillor Cupp, Councillor Davis, Councillor Austin and Councillor Wing, plus the Labour group on overview and scrutiny has been really interesting. So as a young, apparently, I'm nearly 50, novice councillor, it's been a real eye-opener to become involved. When I did get involved and start knocking on doors in Viking Ward, the residents told me that they basically wanted three things. They wanted cleanliness, they wanted someone to tackle the graffiti, and they wanted anyone to tackle the toilets in Broadstairs. And as Councillor Alban will testify, I've not shut up about the toilets in Broadstairs for the last year. So I'm absolutely delighted, and I thank Rob and I thank all the finance team for making these things happen, because they're going to really make a difference to all of our residents, as I'm sure all Broadstairs councillors will agree. And it's a really compassionate, it's a really progressive budget, and I think it's all very well giving people 15p a week back, but what we are doing is we are creating jobs, and we're creating just better services that people throughout Broadstairs will enjoy. I think what this demonstrates is that in light of anything that's thrown at members in this council and on this side, whether it's misrepresentation, whether it's lies, or whether it's bullying, this administration and the councillors on this side of the chamber, and I believe pretty much every councillor in this chamber, will work towards a better Thanet for every resident. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we're going back to the original motion, so I'm going to instruct the Head of Legal and Monitoring Officer to conduct a recorded vote.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Yates. quick.
Is it possible to sum up very briefly? Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it short and sweet, but I'd like to thank Councillor Rattigan, Councillor Pugh, Councillor Austin for their support tonight and the kind words they've said. As mentioned, this is a compassionate, progressive budget. And just on the point about supporting those residents in need, we are introducing funds to actually support residents most in need. As mentioned earlier tonight with the HRA, there's a £30,000 support fund for residents who may struggle to pay the increased rent. And there's also an additional fund within the council tax base report, which some people may not have noticed, but we put £69,000 into a discretionary support fund for those struggling to pay council tax. So that's £69,000 paid for by the removal of council tax relief for properties undergoing structural repair. So when I say compassionate budget, there's reasons behind that, and we put money into specific areas to do what we can for residents, whilst at the same time giving them the services and improvements that we know they need. So that's compassionate. Progressive. So as mentioned, there'll be increased services into core services, cleaner streets, safer streets, and this is, as mentioned, the services the residents are calling for. 72% of residents support our growth area bids in the resident survey, and that's it. So thank you all tonight for those who support us, and yeah, bring on next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Steve Olben. Thank you. Councillor Rashan Ara. Thank you. Councillor Tricia Austin. Thank you. Councillor Abby Lee Barlow. Oh, sorry, you're not here. Sorry. Councillor Jill Bayford. Thank you. Councillor Martin Boyd. Thank you. Councillor Bertie Braidwood.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Joanne Bright. Thank you. Councillor Christian Bright. Thank you. Councillor Leo Britcher. Thank you. Councillor Helen Crittenden. Thank you. Councillor Alan Curry. Thank you. Councillor Alicia Adabro. Thank you. Councillor John Davis. Thank you. Councillor Emma Dawson. Thank you. Councillor John Dennis. Thank you. Councillor David Donaldson. Thank you. Councillor Ruth Duckworth. 4. Thank you. Councillor John Edwards.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Rick Everett.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Rupa Faruqi. Thank you. Councillor Phil Fellows.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Garner.
4.
Thank you. Councillor David Green.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Heather Keane. Councillor Heather Keane.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor George Cupp.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pat Mackinson. Thank you. Councillor Jenny Matterface. Thank you. Councillor Pat Moore. Thank you. Councillor Paul Moore. Thank you. Councillor Alan Munns. Thank you. Councillor Anne-Marie Nixie. Thank you. Councillor Tony Ovenden. Thank you. Councillor Deborah Owen Hughes. Thank you. Councillor Jack Packman. Thank you. Councillor Katie Pope. Thank you. Councillor Rhys Pugh. Thank you. Councillor Mark Rattigan. Thank you. Councillor Brenda Rogers. Thank you. Councillor George Rusecki. Thank you. Councillor Harry Scobie. Thank you. Councillor Will Scobie. Thank you. Councillor Matthew Scott. Thank you. Councillor Abby Smith. Thank you. Councillor Cedric Towning. Thank you. Councillor Helen Whitehead. Thank you. Councillor John Worrow.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Wright. Thank you. And Councillor Rob Yates?
4.
Thank you.
Three.
Yep.
Okay.
45 for and 3 against. Agenda item 8, changes to committees. Would members please refer to the supplement agenda 1?
You want to call on me, Chair?
Yes. Not well. I was going to. I've been stopped.
Have you?
Yeah. So I move that the recommendation as set out in the report be adopted. Right. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Group leaders may wish to take this opportunity to advise of changes to their nominations to committees, panels and boards for the remainder of 2024/25. Does anybody want to make any additional changes? Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chair. On the Governance and Audit panel, there are currently only 7 Labour members, so we'd like to add Councillor Leo Britcher to the vacant Labour seat. And in terms of substitutes, myself and Councillor Whitehead will drop off, and Councillor Harry Scobie and Councillor Helen Crittenden will replace us. On the Overview and Scrutiny panel, replace Councillor Elisa Dabrow with Councillor Joanne Bright. Thank you.
Any other announcements?
Yeah, I'd like to add Councillor Munns to the reserve list for planning, please.
Councillor Pugh, anybody? No? Right, that concludes the business for this meeting of the Council.